Hello and welcome to Manibil. So this will be an anniversary recording, part 30 of my my 30 anniversary recording. Just kidding. Part 30 of my deconstruction of my lengthy deconstruction of his extremely lengthy and bloated lecture series on illusionism, Keith Frankish, and I am I'm in a mode at this point where I kind of just want to get this over with because I basically think he has presented his argument. I have deconstructed it, pointed out irregularities or problems and contradictions and insufficient definitions and all this stuff, right? So I decided to try and not make my comments too long because this is part 30, right? So it might be time to sort of check out how long do I want this deconstruction series to become. So of course, if there's something that sticks out that is completely ridiculous, of course I'm going to comment on it, but I might just add a comment if there's something I have touched on before that he's sort of repeating himself to an extent, maybe, right? I'm just pointing out this is the argument I talked about before and this and that, and then head on as best as I can, right? I tend to get a little emotionally carried away about this because these are, and it might, you might be sort of confused that why is he so emotional about this? But I'm the type of guy who is sufficiently self-confident in, well, if I have an emotional response to something, it's because there's something there. And because I've done this amount of philosophy for going on more than 10 years, right? And I have been through all sorts of, things through my life during the last decade or a bit more maybe, right? I have learned a lot in the last decade. And I have get a grip on myself and I understand myself. I understand how things work and I understand, it's not like I have some bad psychology somewhere where I sort of triggered, right? There's nothing wrong per se in being triggered about something. That's a part of what it is to have a psychology and being a human being. There's something that triggers you. But if you have a bad psychology, let's say, right, it's the wrong things that triggers you. It's maybe not the wrong thing, but it's not a complete picture, triggering picture, you could say, right? If you get triggered by social justice or LGBT shit and all, those are just secondary sort of venting channels where the other things that you should be triggered about, but subconsciously inhibit yourself in being triggered. And then you go and be triggered over here instead because that's allowed for you to be triggered. Then you're triggered into, social justice bullshit and, Greta Thunberg and all that, right? Rather than being triggered about your parents or your government or those people who control you, right? So because that's dangerous, but you can be triggered on some dude saying something on Twitter or Facebook or something like that, right? Because that's safe. So now I am triggered about things that has fundamental aspects to it, like metaphysics we're dealing with here, right? So of course I'm going to be triggered in a sense that if I feel that somebody is spouting something that is clearly not thought through and is based on fallacious assumptions or bad assumptions in the fundamental business, right? Or in the fundamental aspects that they're dealing with, then of course it's like I so badly want to point out that there's problems so that these people might, let's say, which is very unlikely because usually people tend to flock together with those who they agree with and say that those weird people over there are trying to convince us on otherwise, right? And that's possibly why it's a very, very, very bad idea to have something like a government or a constitution or anything like that, which basically says everybody has to do things this way, right? And lo and behold, people who like to do things their own way, or some of them at least, a lot of them, they're very sort of, I should be able to do what I like, but you have to obey the government, right? You have to obey the laws, right? So it's this double standard kind of thing, right? That creeps up everywhere. That you want to be free, but you don't want somebody else to be free because that might inhibit your ability to be free, right? Feminists want everything to go their way, all the money and all the control of the children, all the family destruction and so on, but they don't want, those who are forced to subsidize it to be free to say no thank you, right? So these double standards are everywhere, right? So in this sense, in this situation here I'm dealing with here, right? It's like Keith Frankish wants to be able to tell everybody about his stance on philosophy, right? On these particular philosophical aspects, but he's not likely going to accept any criticism because he's fully convinced that he's right. But if he wants to make a lecture series, implicitly he wants to convince somebody who might think differently that he might be right. Right? So it's when somebody wants to correct somebody, basically, right? Which is sort of implicitly, you could say that from my stance, I'm presenting my philosophy, and that's why I'm very adamant about. Is it called adamant? Very particular on making sure that people understand this is my philosophy, right? A deconstruction is not necessarily my philosophy, but I'm bouncing it against my philosophy, right? So I want to be a spokesperson for philosophy is personal, right? Philosophy is not something that is handed to you by Keith Richards here, right? Frankish. I just saw a video clip with Keith Richards. He's sort of old and gray. But how old is he? 90 now? I mean, he's like, beyond the grave, right? Still playing guitar. I mean, it's incredible that he could stand a total nuclear annihilation, and he and 2 cockroaches would be left, right? Okay. It's like I feel it mandatory. What was it called? I'm feeling a calling that I need to tell Keith Frankish or whoever it might be about the potential shortcomings within his philosophy, right? Now, I'm not telling him what he should think. I'm not telling you what you should think. I'm just bouncing it against my own philosophy, and then it's up to you what the takeaway is. I'm not telling you what to think, even if I state that, now this is how it is, right? That it's not a commandment, it's just a figure of speech, you could say, right? I'm really a proponent of the Enlightenment standards of think fucking for yourself, right? Think for yourself. If you can't think for yourself, you can't just accept somebody else's philosophy because you haven't done the philosophy necessary to clarify how you get to just accept somebody else's philosophy, right? It started with all these circular things that pops up everywhere also, right? People tend to be ignorant of the built-in circularity of their thinking. That yes, you just accept the science or trust the science, but science is not about trusting. It's about experiencing, right? It's this double standards maybe, right? I fucking hate bullshit like that, and I want to deconstruct. And these are the things that also all other aspects, like when he sounds, he tries to sound like a gentleman. He's just presenting his philosophy, but it's also this slightly, in my opinion, passive aggressive. Well, I'm presenting some pros and cons, so you can't just rule out my argument. You might consider there might be something there. This kind of, oh man, that pisses me off, right? Because it's like, you can't reject it completely, so you have to take it seriously, right? Give me something that really, what's it called? Something that really put the nail to the head, right? If you can't say it clearly and strictly and to the point, I'll have to consider that this is bullshit, right? Even if some of it might sound okay, right? But if you have to bloat it into a 10-hour lecture series, I'm not buying it, right? It's like, and this endeavor of trying to deconstruct it might prove to be a very, very long-winded thing. But I mean, it's not my problem that he is sort of, camouflaging his argument in 10 hours of qualia lecture series, right? Okay, so let's head back in. We were at the almost 20-minute mark, so let's see what he has to say. Is phenomenality a datum? And it was about this thing that I'm actually a very big proponent of, right? In my philosophy is that qualia are fundamental, right? That's the first in an experiential timeline, you could say. I'm hesitating using timeline, but structured line of eventual happenings, right? The first time you have the first point where there's anything you can reference is your qualia. Whatever comes before qualia, you do not have access to, right? And this comes before is also an interpretation of the qualia. From the qualia and your experiences is settled into a memory timeline and a reality creation, right? So there's sort of various aspects going on based on these qualia, right? But all these things goings on are all coming after the fact, after the qualia. Hesitate to use the term fact also in this regard. But after the occasion of the qualia, if there weren't qualia, all other shit wouldn't go on, in my opinion, right? Because why would it be there? It has no reason to be there, except because there are qualia, which is just, let's say, automatically generated by the mind, based on possibly the senses, right? So, but it gets complicated because it very quickly gets confusing what we're talking about when we're talking. If you say reality and you don't have access to that outside, is that outside then reality, or is the reality that which you're creating from that reflection of that reality and so on? And I think a lot of metaphysical discussions and presentations and so on get derailed because of insufficient clarification of what we're actually talking about, right? And also a lot of sophistry, right? Because if you can use terms that are sufficiently fluffy and ill-defined, you might lure people into some thinking that you're saying something that you're actually not saying, but you're still dragging them along because they think they know what you're saying, or they're attaching their own understanding of this, right? So that's, at the end of the day, that's why I am so hung up on a fundamental reduction base that is irrefutable, right? And the only thing I can come to think of there is the qualia. And at the same time, in my opinion, qualia is the first experience you have, and that sort of, it fits together like hand in glove, right? So it's like, I can't see any way around it. It's just a functional, very functional philosophy or metaphysics, in my opinion, right? And you can build everything from there, and you can always trace it back to that reduction base. So and if you can work from an axiom that says we all have that, I have that reduction base. Do you consider that to be a functional reduction base? Yes, I'm in the camp that would say most people in the world would agree with me that that could be a functional, at least it could be a functional, maybe they won't agree about it, but they must agree that it's a functional reduction base. So in this way, a lot of people could come together in agreement about that reduction base and then work from there, right? So that would be a potential, constitution, you could say. It's a constitutional approach, which is called axiomatic in philosophy, or the philosophical term that is sort of removed any kind of political inclinations or connotations, which I think is a good thing. Politics is ridiculous. I mean, holy shit, man. Holy shit, man. People are still clinging to politics. It's incredible. They are gaslighting and manipulating and corrupt and self-serving and ignorant and stupid, man. I mean, the people like, USA, like Joe Biden and Donald Trump, these are, I mean, yeah, maybe Donald Trump isn't the worst of the worst, but he's still an idiot, man, right? He's a rich idiot. And the whole system is so fucked up, man, right? It's people think it's there to protect them. At the same time, it's there to take advantage of them, right? So that's also, at the end of the day, one of the things that is so mandatory for me, or I'm so focused on, is that, well, thinking that you can create a system that everybody wants to follow, right, is only possible if there's an agreement involved in it, right? A government telling you should do this or do that, give me this money or shut the fuck up, or you can be killed, or that's not an agreement, right? That's just an appeal to death and murder, right? So what have they done lately? Academic philosophy, right? What have tell me, any of these academic philosophers, have they come up with any kind of moral principle that is functional, that can refer to some kind of reduction base in metaphysics and, establish some kind of idea of knowledge and truth and objectivity and, whatever, right? Show me an academic philosopher who can actually connect the dots in some kind of manner, right? It seems to me they all have these little pet subjects, like Keith Frankish here, right? And thinking, now I've created a philosophy. It's ridiculous, man, right? Okay, enough of that. Let's carry on with Keith here.
We see depends to some extent on what we expect to see. And we can see the same thing in different ways. We can look at the same image, different people can look at the same image and see different things. Or you can look at the same image at different times and see different things.
Okay, so how do you know it's the same image? How do you know? How do you get to that reference? I pointed this out earlier, right? Another appeal to an authority tells you, this is how it is. It isn't there. You are appealing to something you do not have access to, right? Or do you think that you're that kind of God who has certainty, right? It's ridiculous, right? I mean, yeah, if you have an object among you, you might interpret it differently, but it's likely that it's the same object. Why would it be different, right? The only thing that is different is that you have different interpretation and different experiences. But then, if every individual has different experiences, or at least there are discrepancies, well, who knows what's the right version? It might be the one person who is different from 10 other persons who agree, and that one person doesn't agree. But why would it be those 10 persons who are right rather than that one person? How the hell do they get to that point? They don't. It's an appeal to majority or authority or something like that, right? Stupid.
So here's an example. You can look at this this image here, and you can see it as two very different things. If you can see it as a close-up of an old woman looking down to the left in profile, or you can see it as a young woman looking away from you to the left. The nose of the old woman becomes the chin of the younger woman, and the mouth of the old woman becomes the necklace of the younger woman. So if someone asked you to give
If I say I see a beaver, are you going to tell me that there's no beaver there? But it's an old woman and a young woman, whatever, right? Well, you can't get to it. Why is your experience for some reason more correct than my experience? You might be wrong and I might be right? But what you can agree upon is that we don't agree, right? If you say it's an old woman and I say it's a beaver, and you say old woman, then we don't agree about that object. So be it. Fine. Let's not, start to, work on that object if we don't agree upon the object, right? You have to be as show that level of humility and say, well, I'm not going to tell you that it's not a beaver, but I am not experiencing beaver, and I'm taking my experience seriously, but I am respecting your experience and say, okay, then we can work together on that object. And if this situation keeps cropping up, there might be a reason to say, well, I guess in the future we are not going to work together because we seem to unable to agree upon the objects of our experiences, right? So what's wrong with that? It's not about there's one solution. This kind of and that's one of the things I freaking hate about materialism and scientism and all that. There is a answer, and the scientists have spoken. So this is how it is. Fuck off, man.
A report of what you see. If you've only noticed one interpretation, you will say, I see an old woman. The person will say, I see a young.
Again, you can't trust the report, right? You can't trust it. You can't say it's incorrect. But if it differs, you can use it. It could be a lie. It could be different experience. You could experience the incorrect or whatever, right? But you can't get to a certainty level you can compare it to, right? I mean, you can't get to that point. So reporting doesn't function, right? It's a ridiculous claim that any kind of philosophy should be based on somebody else's reporting, right? That is fucking stupid, right? And I can't believe that he's pushing this kind of argument, right?
Same image, same pattern of light rays hitting your retina, but you see different things. Seeing isn't theory neutral. Here's another example. That's start with that image. This is an image that can be seen in different ways. Perhaps that's the most natural interpretation, as two letters of the alphabet, K and B. At least it would be natural to someone who used the Latin alphabet. But you might also, perhaps if you didn't use the Latin alphabet, you might see it as this, as an image reflected on a horizontal axis. So you might see it as the reflection of those symbols there. Perhaps if your language contained the symbols above, which might be a V and a D perhaps, you might see it as those symbols reflected in a mirror perhaps. Or you might see it as a set of numerical digits. If the original image was presented to you in the context of a mathematical context alongside other mathematical equations, You might see it as that, as
So which one of them is the right one? Well, you can't get to that, right? Who decides? Okay, if I had a logo like this and I had a company called Kevin Bacon, right? You might say, okay, it can't be VD, right? Because it's Kevin Bacon, right? I can't rule it out, but it's likely that it would be KB, right? But this is just these gray areas where you sense that you can't be certain that there's a certain interpretation of it. But then he should stick to that, right? Because then he says, okay, but then I can go to use some instrument and tell you what it is, something like that, right? These have to be interpreted by human beings, these kind of qualia. And what human being is going to be the reference point that all other human beings' experiences have to be compared to, because you can't get to any of these experiences but your own. So you have to be able to trust your own experience. You can't let yourself be gaslighted into thinking, well, I have to wait till somebody tells me what to do. That's fucking stupid, man. And that's foundations for why there are so many problems in the world, because people are trained to wait for some kind of authority to tell them how to think. Right? Fuck off, man.
As the statement that 1 is smaller than 13. And I expect we could influence how people interpreted that ambiguous image by the context in which we presented it. If we presented it alongside other letters, they would probably go for the top right interpretation, presented alongside a lot of other examples of horizontal reflection. They would go for the third one, and present it in a mathematical context, and they would go for the fourth one. But in each case, it's the same. It's the same image. The colours here are just to emphasise the interpretation you might place on the original uncoloured monochrome image. And the illusionist will point out that that we can see natural phenomena in different ways too. Take a sunrise. You can see this as the sun moving upwards above a stable horizon. Or you could see the sun as stable and the earth as turning on its axis. And the thought here isn't just that you might interpret what you see in different ways, but the interpretation might affect what you actually see, how you actually experience what's in front of you. Another example is if you're on a railway train and there's another train which is stopped in a station, and there's another railway train next to you, and the one next to you starts to move. Now, you may be confused for a moment as to whether it's your train that is moving backwards or the other train that is moving forwards. And this isn't a matter of how you think about the situation. It's a matter of what you feel you're experiencing. For a moment, you may feel you're going backwards, as opposed to seeing the other train going forwards. So interpretations can affect what we actually experience, and therefore what we report ourselves as experience.
No, our experience is our experience. You're talking about interpretations of the experience, right? The movement you feel must be the movement you feel, right? You don't decide what you feel. You could say your interpretation is a decision on what it means you're feeling, but if you're experiencing red, you might consider that Santa Claus, or a bottle of wine, or a bloody carcass or something, right? But whatever that experience is that experience, right? I would say. Your interpretations might vary, but that doesn't say anything about the experience. The experience is the experience, in my opinion, right? So you're trying to conflate the raw experience, you could say the raw qualia, and your what is it like thing, right? So, and this ambivalence that is built into this philosophy, as far as I can dig it out, is confusing and annoying, because I feel manipulated that I don't know what you're actually talking about when you're doing this, right? It's like you're creating sort of a gray area where you can sort of maybe, get away with something you shouldn't get away with because it's sort of there's a smoke screen up in the understanding of the terms and so on. Seeing the sunrise, it has to arrive in your face. You don't decide that there's a sunrise, right? There is a sunrise, and then you call there is an experience. You then call a sunrise, but sunrise is an interpretation. That's not an experience. Right? Seeing is an experience, you could say, right? It's a particular kind of experience, seeing, which is visual color qualia, right? But sunrise, that's an interpretation. That's not an experience. At least not a qualia experience, right? If you have a certain palette of that experience, these colors, and you say, that is a sunrise, right? That is an interpretation. That is not an experience. You need to be clear about this, right? And if somebody doesn't see a sunrise, it's fine. That's their interpretation, right? And you can't even know you can't even get to the point where you can say, you have the same kind of qualia that I do, right? And if you're talking about the same qualia, you cannot get to the point where you can say, if you say, point to say red, and then the other guy says, I agree, red. You can't even get to whether or not you have the same qualia that you call red, right? And that's another point about these reports he's talking about. It's stupid, man, right? It's illuminating me about how ignorant he is about these kinds of thinking, these kinds of philosophies, right?
Experiencing, therefore, the observational data. So that means that observation.
And actually, I might add, the ignorance allows him to argue this way, because if he wasn't ignorant about these particular aspects, he wouldn't be arguing this way, because he would realize that there are a lot of assumptions and contradictions built into it that he does not identify now, because he thinks he's on safe ground, right? So he just keeps cycling ahead in this without, the foundations are screwed, right? And his lecture series might be not a series, but one lecture that says this is the foundations, right? So it might take him 45 minutes if he could get to the point, right? Not similar to my, statement on metaphysics, right? Sorry. Let me see if I can.
Reports of what we've observed around us are not immune from correction, because it may be that the theory that is tacitly informing our experience, that is shaping how we experience the world, is a bad one. I may feel that my railway carriage is moving backwards, and it isn't. But the experience of moving backwards is, and the report that I give of that experience is inaccurate.
Who says that? So you are the master telling people, no. You might have it moves this way. No, it moves that way. So your personal experience is above everybody else's experience, or what? Or who is this person? If it's not you, right? Who is this perfect person who knows everything, apparently? What kind of appeal is that? An appeal to authority, right? Give me a fucking break, man.
So, observational reports reports on perceptual reports on our environment are not immune from correction. We may be seeing things
But who is the corrector, right? Who is the one who knows things, right? Above what I might experience, right? I'm sitting in the train saying, this train is going this way. And you say, no, you're wrong. I know what's right, because I'm Keith Richards, right? I know what's right. Fuck off, man. And if you can create this loophole, right, that your report is not immune from correction, Why should introspective reports be different? But they were in introspective reports, weren't they? Perceptual reports. So perceptual is your direct experience. So you can say to people, you have qualia, that is incorrect. How the hell do you do that? I mean, oh my God. You have, I didn't even see that. If perceptual reports, that must be qualia, right? Even though this perceptual hasn't been defined at all, right? In this context here, in his context. So you can correct the report. But then if you're correcting a report on a qualia, then you're saying they're lying. Because how can you tell whether or not they are lying? And you can't even tell them what they're experiencing. So how the hell can you correct them? Because introspection in this context apparently means your interpretation of what is going on, right? In your interpretation of your experiences, right? Or your qualia. So they can also. So why should they be, immune from correction? I mean, I can't believe how ridiculous this is, man. Right? Holy fuck, man. So he's basically telling you that he can come to your place and say you are not experiencing this, or that experience you have is incorrect, right? That qualia is incorrect, and if you have an interpretation of that qualia, right? I can say that, why shouldn't I be able to say that that interpretation is also incorrect, right? Because I am Mr. Know-it-all. I am Mr. Perfection and, certainty, right? Fuck the shit off, man, right? I can't believe how stupid this is, man. This guy is fucking dangerous, right? He's a fucking idiot, man. Holy crap, it's stupid, this man, right? I can't fucking believe how stupid it is, man. Oh, man. And he sits there looking so innocent. He's just done some philosophy, right? Telling you that he can tell you, trying to convince you that he can tell you that your experiences could be incorrect, right? And therefore your interpretation of them could also be incorrect. And he can tell you whether or not it's the case. Or at least he must know someone who can, right? Otherwise, who the hell would those people be then, right? Is it divine intervention or, what? Fuck off, man.
Wrong way. So why should introspective reports be any different? If perception is theory-laden, and we can see things in different ways, why shouldn't introspection be theory-laden too? And we can introspect things in different ways. So while perception is monitoring the world around us, introspection is monitoring our own brain processes, and maybe we introspect them as something they're not. Maybe we introspect them as...
Yeah, maybe you are also introspecting so you can't correct. Why would you be any different from anybody else? So who is that person telling everybody? Yeah, they can say that you might be wrong. What they are comparing it to, because they have their own experiences only, right? So if you can be incorrect in your experiences, then the person who are telling people that they might be correct might be using an incorrect experience. I mean, what level of academic, circle jerking, ass licking, whatever level do you need to get to not realize what you're saying, right? I mean, I'm dumbfounded. I don't know what to say, man. I can't believe that he is this ignorant, right? I mean, it's like he's fucking brainwashed into this scientism, right? It's ridiculous, man.
Phenomenal qualities, which they're not really. Maybe it's an introspective illusion. So if you imagine the case of the the image of the old lady.
Just to reiterate this, he's saying you might be wrong, right? That must mean that he's not pointing to any particular person, right? He's saying you might be wrong. That is the same as saying anybody might be wrong, right? So that means nobody can be certain, right? So nobody can correct anybody, right? Nobody can correct anybody. You just said it. So you can't be immune from correction. No, but who is correcting? If everybody can be wrong, or anybody can be wrong, right? And if not everybody or anybody can be wrong, then who are those fucking perfect individuals who are always right? Fuck off, man, right?
And the young woman. Let's suppose that let's suppose that's not a drawing, but an actual real old woman. Okay, and when you look at her, you can see her as she really is, as an old woman, or you could also see her as this young woman. Now, if you see her as the young woman, you're misperceiving her. And maybe we're misintrospecting the brain processes that introspection is tracking. We're misintrospecting them as qualia, when in fact they're not that at all. Okay, now the realist, of course, will come back on this and they will say something like this, I guess. Look, introspective reports are quite different from perceptual ones. This analogy doesn't hold.
Yeah, of course it is. I just pointed it out. Yeah, but then it's a matter of definitions of words then, right? It's perceptual introspective reports, right? No, a report is a report, but it's a report about different aspects because you're using two different terms, right? You're using perceptual and introspective. You can't equate them. They must be two different aspects. Otherwise, you're confusing everybody, right? So they're not different. But you just made this dichotomy of a qualia, apparently, in order to both reject qualia and use qualia in order to reject qualia, right? You are so tangled up in abstractions and terms and whatever that it's fucking ridiculous, this thing you're doing, right? I mean, this should be pulled from the internet and you make at most a 1 hour representation of your philosophy without referring to anybody criticizing or this or that or the other. You just present your philosophy straight and to the point and nothing else, right? Just present your fucking philosophy straight and to the point. And then ask somebody who can do it to help you do it. Because you can't apparently do it on your own, right? You're just mumbling and fumbling about, right? And then, of course, the realist would come and say this, but it's up here. Ugh.
Reports of one's current phenomenal state can't be mistaken if you attend carefully to what it's like for you at this moment, and you have the right kind of vocabulary to describe it.
Attentive reports of one's current phenomenal state cannot be mistaken. No, but it's not the report. The report, the photograph of the moon could be incorrect, you could say, right? It cannot be the moon at least, right? Because it's a photograph of the moon. So a report of something is not the thing being reported, right? So to me, this thing about qualia is so fucking simple. It's only because something that is so obvious needs to be rejected by these people that it ends up being so convoluted and so complicated and so confusing and so on, right? It just ticks off all the boxes of stupid philosophy, right? Attentive reports of one's current phenomenal state cannot be mistaken. No, that's a realist claim. I understand it's not his claim, but he's reflecting on it compared to his, right? So he's saying that a phenomenal report on a phenomenal state cannot be, of course it can be mistaken, but you cannot know whether it's mistaken or not because you don't have that phenomenal state to compare the report to. I mean, are you a fucking idiot? You mentioned the zombie problem. Apparently now you can circumvent the zombie problem by saying, well, I have an experience and my experience is perfect. Something like that. So you're an authority going around telling people they have incorrect phenomenal states. Right? At what point can you pull the Nazi card on this? Totalitarian card? Because it's just leaning up against somebody telling everybody what is right and what is wrong, right? What is the actual experience and what isn't, right? It's sort of dragging you out of your own ability to make your own assumptions based on your experiences. Read between the fucking lines here, man, right? That's probably why he's some kind of champagne communist who wants the big state to control everybody, right? I bet you I'll fucking eat my own underwear if this guy is not some kind of semi-communist, right? I'll bet I'm fucking eating my underwear, right? I'll wash it first, okay? Yellow on the front, brown in the back.
Then the report can't be mistaken. It's your phenomenal properties, your qualia, are presented to you in too immediate a way for you to mistake them. Their nature is completely revealed to you in introspection. There's no possibility of your missing something or getting something wrong. Now,
no, but again, this is circumventing the core problem you're trying to argue. You're trying to argue about the interpretation of the qualia. There might be as many interpretations of particular qualia as there are people. And at the same time, you can't get to each of the individuals' qualia, right? Because you only have your own qualia. And then you're going to say, well, I need there to be certainty about these qualia or whatever experiences you're referring to. So if you have a different interpretation, there's something wrong with you, right? It's this fear of different interpretations of the same qualia, which at the same time you can't get to other people's qualia. This anxiety creates stupid philosophy like this because you can't encompass the whole idea that somebody else might have different ideas, different interpretations, right? So oftentimes it bounces against your personal psychological states of fear and anxiety and so on, right? And then the psychology pushes back into a certain dot connection, right? And confirmation bias, right? So hey, get your philosophy straight. There's sort of the psychology of the mind, right? And getting rid of that to not screw with your philosophy might be one of the biggest things. There is sort of a Socratic ideal, right? So it's like know thyself, right? It's more like get rid of all your fucking bullshit and start fresh, right? All these preconceived ideas of what you should think is infected, and this guy is completely infected by all sorts of preconceived ideas about where he should arrive in his conclusions, right? He's not free-form philosophizing, right? He's just connecting the dots into his particular kind of ism, right? Illusionism.
I think the illusionist is going to say to that, well, how? What secures that unrevisability? What makes that the case? That, okay, that's maybe how it seems to you, but how do you know it's true? Why is introspection so different from perception? Aren't they both information gathering mechanisms? We have sense organs that are sensitive to
Just want to cut him off here. Say, well, good philosophy, in my opinion, is you need to settle your foundations, right? You need to settle these basic things that you have to adhere to for the rest of your philosophy, right? And what you need, if you're presenting that philosophy, it needs to be crystal clear what you're talking about, right? You have to be samurai sword sharp what you're saying. And you have to stick to it rigidly throughout the rest of your philosophy. As soon as you add a new term to it, it has to be fully understood what that term entails based on the previous philosophy and terms used, right? Otherwise, I should consider you're screwing with me, right? Now, this is the completely opposite camp, right? He's just throwing new words at you, right? Without clarifying anything, right? Introspective reports, intensive reports, and current phenomenal state, in unrevisability, and immunity from correct. What's immunity? That's it's a medical thing, right? So it's a half-ass, agenda-driven bullshit kind of thing he's got going here, right? So it's like all the warning signs are there, in my opinion, right?
Features of the world and sensory systems that generate models of the world on the basis of the information our sense organs supply. And I guess something similar is going to be happening with introspection. We're going to have some kind of internal monitoring mechanisms that are sensitive to our own brain processes, and they're going to generate some kind of model of what's happening within the brain. And what guarantees that this model is always going to be accurate any more than our model of the external world, of our environment is going to be? These mechanisms they're good enough for their purposes, but are they guaranteed to be perfect? No, it's hard to see why. And indeed, if the introspection is a representational mechanism, then it's very hard to see how it could be its results, its outputs could always be.
Okay, then now I'm confused. Representational mechanism. What is that? Has he talked about mechanism before? What is that in relation to the previous statements throughout this? A no representational mechanism. What is that? What are these kinds of representational mechanisms he's referring to? I don't understand what those are, right? What are they, right? It's this kind of just, creating concepts, ideas, statements, whatever, without telling you what he's talking about, right? It's sort of a huge red flag that he's probably doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. And the worst thing is, he thinks he knows what the hell he's talking about, right? Those people are sort of halfway, and and he thinks he's also very good at this, apparently. Otherwise, he wouldn't do it, right? He would sort of, hide away somewhere, right? And keep pretending being good somewhere where he's not this kind of open about it, right? But, it takes a certain level of self-confidence or, confidence in your philosophy being fucking rigid and good in order to present this, right? Spending 10 hours arguing this shit. And it's hard to, I guess, for a lot of people in the philosophical realm, to if you have decided you're good at this kind of philosophy, it will be even harder, I think, to realize that you're not, because then you have to pull everything off your website or all the things you have written in scientific magazines or philosophical magazines and 10-hour presentations on YouTube and so on. They have to be pulled down then, right? And that's sort of a losing battle, or that would be, what's the word I'm looking for? That would be seen as pathetic and so you have to, sunk cost, or what is it called, right? You have to stick to your guns and keep pretending that you're right. And then, use all kinds of sophistry to make sure that people are not attacking this shit, right? And this is sort of that's the point That's the point where you become a dinosaur, right? A philosophical dinosaur, right? People will have to deconstruct your shit like I'm doing here to point out how ridiculous it might be or is, in order to make sure that the inherent attempt at appealing to you as a kind of authority on this shit is not going to overrule people's ability to think straight about it, right? So I'm like, I think I'll have, maybe I have 5 minutes left, so maybe we can get past this datum thing. I actually spent an hour discussing this. Oh, it's 10 minutes, okay. And it just, I mean, does it really take him 10 minutes to elaborate on this particular thing, right? It does seem bloated, right? And with the risk of people missing the point or getting it's about attention span, I guess it's called, right? If you have something that is interesting, I mean, if you get a point, it's like a movie that is 4 hours long and nothing really happens. Your attention span can't fit it in, right? But if it's the Return of the King and 4 hours long, it might be, you might be exhausted after it, but because a lot of things are happening within those 4 hours, right? So it's like you have to fit your presentation to people's attention span, right? Otherwise, you have to conclude that they don't care about it, right? And maybe they even don't want to fit it to the attention span, so that people are sufficiently confused so you maybe can get back at them and say, oh, that's because you didn't, read this at minute 48 or something like that, or hear that, right? Because it's so bloated, so you can hide within that bloating thing, right?
Accurate and unrevisable in this way. No representational mechanism could be absolutely infallible in that way. It could always break down. So I guess the realist is going to have to posit something like direct acquaintance here. This relation we talked about last time in the last lecture, in lecture 3, this primitive relation between the subject and their own phenomenal qualities, their own phenomenal properties, which is not mediated by some mechanism. Doesn't involve constructing representations of the thing, of its targets. It's direct and immediate, and there's no room there for error or for failure. But as I pointed out in the last lecture, this is a rather mysterious relation to introduce. Difficult to explain how an evolved biological organism could be acquainted with any aspect of the world in this direct and immediate way, even with an aspect of itself. And we also have the problem that I discussed of what the subject of the acquaintance relation would be, and as we saw, we might even have to posit an immaterial soul to be the subject of the acquaintance relation. So there are lots of.
I'm dumbfounded what acquaintance now means. Is a representation an acquaintance, and perception, introspection. I mean, are they overlapping, these terms, or right? It's sort of, okay, now I'm bringing in a new term, so I don't have to relate to the old term, and now it's getting more and more, tangled up in concepts, right? Or, ideas and abstractions. Direct acquaintance is mysterious. I don't know what he's talking about, to be honest, right? And I don't want to sort of, okay, I guess it's this. I don't want to sit here guessing what he's talking about, because I might guess wrong, and that based the next interpretations of his philosophy incorrectly, because I based it on something before that wasn't correct according to whatever. It's like it all fizzles out in the sand, right? It all fizzles away, this philosophy. It becomes so diluted with words and so on that you lose contact with what the hell we're talking about, right? And be very weary about this, right? Be very focused on when people are doing this, because it's dysfunctional, in my opinion. It's basically screwing with your, whether or not he does it on purpose or not, I can't know that. But, I can tell him that I don't buy this shit, right? No matter how good it might be, it's diluted with words, so I can't eat it, right? I don't buy it, right? It's stupid that he's that somebody hasn't told him, you can't do it this way, man, right? And it's because, he's a professor, so you don't criticize the professor. No, you lick his ass and tell him, you're so great. Oh, yes. So I can get my PhD, right, professor? Because I'm not going to criticize you. I want my PhD.
The problems with that. Now, the realist might say here, well, okay, you're suggesting that introspection is theory-laden, that the way we experience our inner lives, the way we introspect, is informed by a theory of consciousness. The theory that mental lives consist in acquaintance with, that our inner lives consist of acquaintance with qualia, and that therefore that's how we experience what's going on when we introspect. But that would suggest then that we could change that we could introspect our inner lives as something else. And
what?
Can we? Can we experience what's happening to us? Can we experience our situation as one that doesn't involve phenomenal consciousness? Well, the first thing to say is that the illusionist doesn't have to claim that we can introspect differently, that we can introspect our inner lives as something other than qualia filled. It may be that the illusion of phenomenality is hardwired into our introspective systems, so that we can't see things differently.
No, and that's because it is apparently advantageous to not be able to decide whether or not you are experiencing elephant, right? What you do with the elephant and interpret this situation, and this is a dangerous situation, and this is a fine and undangerous situation, that's up to you maybe to some extent, right? But if you experience an elephant, you experience an elephant, right? Maybe you shouldn't be able to decide whether or not you experience elephant, because and more important, if I say you shouldn't be able to decide whether or not you're experiencing tiger, because if you can say no, there's no tiger there, and then stop experiencing it, well, you would be eaten, right? Likely, it would be tiger food, right? Just like you shouldn't be able to decide whether or not your heart should beat. It just keeps beating whether you like it or not, right? So certain things that is sort of beyond your control, right? You just have to decide whether you need to feed on it, you need to fuck it, you need to flee from it, or you need to fight it, right? That's what you need to decide, right? Let's get this bit done. We are past the 1 hour mark, so let's just be done with this.
Differently. Many perceptual illusions are like that. Even when you know that it's an illusion, even if you know that, say that two lines which appear to be of different lengths, even if you know that they're of the same length, you can't.
So let me ask you, Keith, how do you know they're the same length, right? What is that insight you are using to get to that point, right? Your rationalizations about it is not the direct experience. So your rationalizations are apparently more important than your experiences, right? But you needed that experience or that qualia, an interpretation of that qualia, in order to have these rationalizations, right? So how would you have rationalizations without having experiences? Well, my point is you wouldn't. So the experience comes before the rationalizations and the interpretations, right? So from that bare-bone philosophy, it makes no sense to say you should stay with your experience or your abstractions, right? because you needed those qualia in order to get to those abstractions. You can't leave the qualia behind at some point and say, I got a lot of abstractions now. Now I don't need the qualia. That's stupid, right? It's stupid.
Can't help but still see them as being different. Illusions in that, like that, are said to be cognitively impenetrable. The beliefs you have about the situation don't change how you experience it. So
Agreed.
all that the illusionists' basic claim is that there is an illusion here, and that we, on reflection, we can accept that. They don't have to claim that we can actually introspect our inner lives in a more accurate way. Still, there may be possibilities in this area. It may be possible to introspect differently. And here's a suggestion along those lines. Imagine a group of people who I've called Mephistos.
Okay.
I'll explain that in.
He keeps going in this. Oh, man, okay. I'll leave you here at 1 hour and 5 minutes, so too bad if you're on Odyssey, you won't be listening to this, because I'm not going to make the separate upload, right? So you will have to go to, and maybe go to Rumble. I'm also on Rumble, and I might add a link down below. I don't think I've done that so far, but and they upload longer videos than 1 hour, right? So you can always find them on Rumble. So otherwise, please share and like and subscribe. Leave me a comment. Check out the Discord forum below. And otherwise, have a nice day. See you in the next one.